Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In articulating for us his theory of moral development, Lawrence Kohlberg sets out a number of distinct stages of moral development, and he also tells us that he's more interested in form rather than content when it comes to moral reasoning. Now, a lot of the early work that he did was with school children, but he also worked within prisons, and he would carry out these experiments where he would set up a dilemma, and I'll tell you about the dilemma in a moment, and then he would ask people to say, what is the right answer here, and then to give some sort of justification for their answer, to explain a little bit further. And the situation has to do with this guy, Hans, and you could do it with other situations as well, other moral dilemmas. Is a particularly good case. Hans has a wife who's sick, and the pharmacist will not allow her to have the very expensive medicine because Hans does not have the money to pay for it. The question is, should Hans then break into the pharmacy and take the medicine, which will allow his wife to continue her life, or should he not do that? Which is the right thing to do? But more importantly, why? And this goes directly to this issue of form and content. Form and content not just in terms of our thoughts or our verbal expressions, but also in terms of our actions. And this is what makes Kohlberg's theory so interesting for ethics, besides the classification of the 6 stages. He's very interested in what we would call practical reasoning. That is the way of using our faculty of reason along with our other faculties to arrive at decisions and judgments about what is good and what ought to be done, or conversely, what is bad and what ought to be avoided. Now, if we think about this in terms of form and content, he tells us in Moral Development, a review of the theory, really encompasses 2 main things. The first is what people think is right or wrong. And he's not quite so interested in that on its own, for its own sake. Again, form and content. Content matters because there's a form that gives that content its location, its context. What people think is right or wrong by itself is not that important or interesting. What's important is what they do with that and how they arrive at that. Likewise, he says their behavioral responses by themselves, which would include actions, but could also include, say, attitudes. Maybe even we could talk about, the decisions that are made are kind of a behavioral response as well, or somewhere in between behavioral and cognitive. Those 2 are just content. So what is the form? And he takes this actually from John Dewey, who he brings up along with Piaget. He says, like Piaget, Dewey's idea of development does not reflect an increase in the content of thinking, but instead a qualitative transformation in the form of the child's thought or action. He says, what we examine in our work has to do with form rather than content, right? We are not thinking or describing what people think is right or wrong, whether draft evading exiles should be given amnesty or thrown into jail when they return to this country, or even what changes in what individuals think as they grow older. And here he's referring to another one of his own articles. He says that what we're looking at here is cognitive structures. Cognitive structures underlying what people think is right and wrong. Cognitive structures underlying behavioral responses. The thing that actually connects all of these together, and what we can observe when we ask people, why do you think that's right or wrong? Why do you feel the way that you do? And they explain it to us. So he goes on and he says, for example, this structure refers to the general characteristics of shape, pattern, or organization of response rather than the rate of intensity of a response or its pairing with particular stimuli. It refers to rules for processing information or for connecting experienced events. Now, how do we translate all that jargon into moral theory? Really, what we're talking about here is how a person carries out his or her moral reasoning and decision-making, whether it's their own, whether it's a proxy for somebody else, whether it's about some hypothetical case that is put in front of them. This is the form, the thought process that they go through and then set down in words so that we can all see it. It also includes what they are referencing in explaining or justifying their views. How they're taking the things that they value, how they're taking the things that they think matter or are right and wrong, how they're taking those into the situation and connecting them up with the ultimate need to say yes or no, right or wrong, do this, don't do that. Now, at different levels, like, for example, at level 1, you can ask a person, why did you do that? Or why didn't you do that action? Or why should a person not do that action? Or, in the case of Hans, why should Hans either steal or not steal the medicine? And at a level 1, they might say, well, Hans shouldn't steal the medicine because he'll be punished. The police will come and beat him up and throw him in jail. And it won't do his wife any good, but it's really bad for Hans to go in jail because they'll hurt him there. Well, that's a level 1. That's an explanation of why he shouldn't do that thing. At level 4, there might be another thing. Well, listen, the rules are the rules. It's unfortunate that Hans doesn't have any money, but we can't have people going around breaking into everybody's pharmacies when they need, some sort of thing that they can't pay for. Society can't take that. We have to protect society. That's a level 4 justification, and that is a different form for a similar content. The similar content being, Hans, keep your hands off. Different explanation for why that's the case. Similarly, if we take a level 3 response and then maybe a level 6 response. Hans loves his wife so much that he will break in, and that's the right thing for him to do because he doesn't really care that much about the shopkeeper. That's his neighbor, but he really loves his wife, and he wants his wife to stay alive and for them to be happy together. That's a level 3 response, right? Hans is a nice guy. He's a good guy, and he has a nice girl. That's a level 3 orientation. What about if we put it up to level 5 or level 6? Maybe at a level 6, you could say, well, Hans recognizes that he cannot sacrifice the humanity within his wife merely to uphold, values important to society, like not breaking people's windows and taking their stuff. Human life has a priority over mere material, right? We invoke something like a Kantian distinction between what has genuine value and what only has the value that we could call trade or use value, right? Some things have cost, other things have dignity. That is a level 6 form response. But both the level 3 and the level 6 response saying, Hans, get in there, take the medicine, give it to your wife, both of them are working with the exact same content. So we can have the same content and have a different form, and the form is what determines whether a person is in fact at one stage of moral development or at another. So that is what Kohlberg thinks we need to focus upon.